Next Curve.
Hey everyone, welcome to this Next Curve reThink podcast episode where we break down the latest tech and industry events and happenings in the world of semiconductors and Karl's favorite topic, AI, into the insights that matter. I'm Leonard Lee, executive analyst at Next Curve. And in this Silicon Futures episode, we will be talking about all kinds of stuff that's been happening in the month of July. We're still in July, but the headlines still keep coming at us. No doubt we're going to try to touch on ASML, the tariffs on the EU, probably talk about TSMC's blowout quarter. There was that America's AI action plan, Micron, SOCOM. Karl wants to talk about China. The list goes on and on and on, and it includes Intel and the fate of Foundry and 14A. I bet you $1 million. One of you guys wants to talk about that. So those are the things that we're going to be covering. And I'm joined by the always peak loaded Karl Freund of Cambrian AI Research and the overclocked and running hot. That rhymed, Jim. Jim McGregor of famed Tirias Research and oh my gosh, special guest and hopefully permanent resident of Silicon Futures, Mario Morales of IDC. And if you don't know who Mario is, then you know nothing about the semiconductor industry. Gentlemen, how's it going?
Good, but since none of my topics were on that list, do I get $1 million from you?
Really? Oh, I'm really interested in.
I'm just teasing. I'm teasing.
There, buddy. All right. Okay. So, hey guys, let's get this started. I mean, where do we want to start? There's just so much stuff. I don't know. Mario?
Well, the latest news is Intel. You want to start there?
You want to start there?
Sure.
We can start there, and it kind of parlays into Foundry and a lot of other topics.
Yeah. So, who wants to make the first comment? Let Mario. Come on. Bring us in.
Well, I mean, Intel, what can we say? It's still a lot of work to be done. You heard the numbers. I mean, at a top line level, their numbers looked pretty solid, right? But when you start digging deep into the margins and what's most concerning to me is the debt structure, right? The company now has over $50 billion worth of debt. Their foundry business is losing probably over $10 billion this year. That's up from last year. So that's a considerable concern. And also the unfortunate part of all of this is that the lack of execution of the company is now going to cost 25,000 people. They're not only their jobs, but their livelihoods. And so a lot of times the employees are the ones that bear the brunt of all of this, but it really comes down to the management teams in the organization that just made bad decisions. And one of them was excessively investing in an industry that they needed to really understand more. And the foundry industry is a very different industry. It's not about manufacturing alone. It's a service industry. And then you have to be able to manage hundreds of customers at a time, a very complex supply chain. And these are things that Intel is still gradually learning, right? And it's going to take some time. I mean, I think people were spooked by the point, and it makes sense, right? But they were spooked by the point that Intel talked about the potential of not moving 14 angstrom forward, especially if they can't find a customer. And I'm more concerned about what happens to 18A. I know that's going to be the strategic focal point for the company, but it's still an area where I think we need to see more success before we at least hail it as a first turnaround for the company.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. And I've always thought that it was important for them to really make traction internally with their foundry services, right? The internal customer being key. And, as you guys know, that's still a work in progress. But gentlemen, any thoughts? I'm sure you have tons, but top of mind, top insights.
I'd say it's Intel's problem is not they made bad decisions. They made easy decisions. right? They weren't willing to make the hard decisions. What are you not going to do? What are you going to double down on? So now Liputan is saying, yeah, we're going to double down on AI, which is the right thing to do. AI is becoming pervasive. Um, um, but they've tried it 3 times, right? They tried it with Manycore, then they tried it with Nirvana, then they tried it with Habana Labs. Now they're going to come back to their own GPU. So their fourth architecture, you got to wonder, does the market have the patience for that? We'll see. They've already said that their first generation of that was not going to be competitive, so they canceled it. It'll be a development platform. So that pushes it way out. And meanwhile, NVIDIA just taking off like a rocket, and AMD's run as fast as they can to catch up a little bit. But I'm not sure there's room for a third.
I would kind of liken Intel where it was when Paul Otellini took over. They were kind of behind the curve on 64-bit. AMD and Microsoft had taken the lead on that. And they were facing stiffer competition. They're very much in that same position now, and kind of failing in some of their product areas. So they're in the same position now, and Liputan's following a very similar playbook that Paul Otellini did. Scale everything back to the core competencies and the core products. Intel gave up on the communications sector and a lot of other sectors, automotive, which they've given up on again, and a lot of segments that they aren't profitable and they don't have a market leadership position in. From a survival strategy, I think that's great. It does have long-term implications on the growth opportunities, but let's face it, Intel does have to secure the markets it's in before it does anything else. So I completely agree with that. And it has to be a player in AI. If it's not, then they become kind of one of these technology providers that fades into the background during one of these major market transitions, one of these inflection points. So they need to overcome that. Big concerned. Some of the statements coming out of Intel, Liputan's going to approve every design win, or every chip design before it goes to tape out. That's a huge challenge. But obviously, Intel needs more structure and needs to be going, focusing on profitability and focusing on the products where it needs to win. So hopefully we see that going forward.
Yeah, I would agree, Jim. I think that you can't compare it to Paul Otellini's time. I think the difference, though, is that there isn't the top line growth that Paul had, right? So if you look at the tenure of Paul, they were still able to manage a considerable amount of growth because the server part of their business really began to grow in that space, and Xeon did so well.
Yes.
And so that helped them kind of mask some of the weaknesses that they were experiencing in other parts of the business, not being in mobile and so forth. Now, today it's completely different. You've missed the largest opportunity. Even though you're showing little pieces of growth in the market, you're not growing at 20% the way the market is, or growing even faster because you're not in AI. And that's the challenge now, right? As you're pruning more and more, you're still trying to find that discipline that you need. You're missing the top line growth. And that's what I don't see with Intel now, is that top line growth is going to be a challenge that's going to eat into their resources that they have today.
I think that is absolutely a key point. If you look at, and I'm sure you have, the IDC workstation, server market revenue tracker, it was shocking, and it doesn't get the attention perhaps that it used to, but it showed that the x86 servers are growing at 60% in fourth quarter last year. While as non-x86 servers, everything Intel's not focused on, increased 260%. That's just phenomenal. A big chunk of that is going to ARM, and a big chunk of that is going to NVIDIA Grace. And there's a chunk of that going to other platforms like IBM Linux One and others. but Grace has got probably, we don't have the numbers behind that.
You have to remember, those are different perspectives, though.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I would agree to a certain point, Carl. I agree that there's faster growth to be had that they're missing out on. But a lot of the growth from ARM has not been from merchant silicon. It's been all captive, right? This is why Ampere was sold off and they just could not create a merchant business. And most of the other companies, including Broadcom and Qualcomm's initial take into the space, they all could not grow merchant business. And I think a lot of the business for ARM will be internal. It'll be very custom. And the only exception will be NVIDIA, because NVIDIA has been able to pull in Grace with Blackwell. And so that's allowed them some penetration. And if you look at Grace from the beginning, it was mostly focused on supercomputers. That's where they've had some traction, right? But now it's broadening because the ramp of Blackwell has been so fast, but I still believe that NVIDIA in AI servers still needs x86. You're still seeing the traction. That's where I think Intel had a bright spot, where they talked about some of the wins that they've had there, and I think that will continue. I think ARM will become more interesting as we start thinking about sovereign AI, and we start thinking about players like OpenAI and SoftBank and all these other portfolio companies that SoftBank has. They're all trying to maneuver and start trying to think about, how do I use the asset of ARM within my portfolio of companies? And I think that's where I think it's going to get a lot more interesting. And of course, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, they're all using more and more ARM as well. So we'll see how that plays out over time.
Yeah.
Regarding Intel, though, you have to remember that there's three core competencies of that company. One is the IA processor architecture. One is R&D, which without Intel investing in our industry, we wouldn't be anywhere where we are today. I mean, they have been a huge, everything from process technology to materials technology to transistor design. We wouldn't be where we are today without Intel. So the industry needs Intel from that perspective. And the third one is their actual process technology and packaging technology, their manufacturing arm. And I do think it is gaining. I mean, they're definitely a leader in packaging, and they're actually making money in the foundry business doing packaging for third parties. The struggle is becoming a foundry. We've seen other companies struggle at that. Global Foundry struggled at that for over a decade. Samsung is currently struggling with foundry. So they need to find their fit for the foundry segment. 18A, Mario mentioned that. It definitely will be used internally. Unfortunately, and Intel admits this, they were kind of late in locking down the PDK for 18A, which kind of missed some customer targets. 14A, they're trying to lock down a lot earlier, and they're trying to come out with different SKUs, for mobile and low power type applications. So there's still a lot of work that has to be done there, but Intel has to execute on all three of those core competencies, and the industry needs it to. So, and you also have to remember from the foundry perspective, there are a lot of stakeholders now. The EU government has invested in Intel. The US government has invested in Intel. Customers have invested in Intel for foundry. They need to execute on foundry more than anything else.
Well, yeah, and products as well, because the latest news coming out is, I don't know if it's rumor, but there's headlines coming out about Intel looking to spin out or spin off the next group, the network and edge group, right? So there's a lot of pieces that continue to move within Intel, but I want to go back to the comment that Karl made earlier and the need for an AI strategy. I think that continues to be the biggest gap. We talked about this at Vision, right? When we were at that bar and we recorded our little thing.
What bar? I don't remember. No, just kidding.
Yeah. One of the things that really concerns me is this continued lack of vision for where they want to go. There was mention of maybe intercepting the market trend toward agentic AI. That was one of the things that Lip-Bu
when they mentioned that is really them admitting that they can't compete in training, right? And so they have to go to
Right.
inferencing to be able to at least capture some mind share and eventually some commercial opportunities in AI. So this is a pretty big pivot for them, but I think it's the right pivot now just because inferencing is exploding, not just in the data center, but also at the edge, right?
But here's the thing, Mario. Was it ever really a pivot for them? Because this is what we heard also from Pat back at Vision last year. And so I don't think this is new thinking. I think it's just curious that over almost a year and a half after those early conversations about with Intel about what is your AI strategy, that they're still they still don't have something gelled.
Yeah, the difference though is that when Pat said it, the AI inference market was not really formulated, right? I think when you look at it today, you're definitely seeing the growth, and there's a big difference there. That's one part of it, and I was going to just point out that that everyone's had an inference strategy. And it used to be that Intel used to do a lot of the inferencing in the data center. 90% was really geared towards Xeon, right? Xeon had some capability to support inferencing, but that market just became so much bigger and faster that the GPU took over. And I just think for them, they're betting on the fact that not everyone's gonna just focus on frontier models at the endpoints, right? Or in enterprises, that there's gonna be a happy medium, or the market will segment a lot more. And if that's the case, it does open up the room for other alternatives to go after that space. And one of the key strengths I think Intel has is their position in enterprise. I think that this is something that they need to leverage more, and they just need to have the portfolio to be able to go after that.
Yeah. Okay. Any last thoughts on Intel?
Just one quick one. The fact they're giving up training could be exactly what they need to do, because what most of NVIDIA sales in the data center are chips that can be used for training and inference, and that's a strength. That's a strength today. But having a solution that's designed for inference opens up new degrees of freedom they didn't have before. So, for example, they can look at the memory architecture and come up with a much lower cost approach for inference using different kinds of memory than HBM that would allow them to have a significant cost advantage if they can deliver adequate performance for distributed inference, right? Things like agentic AI.
But that's already happening. We've already, Jim, you and I, we were at Computex. We see that happening, and Intel is sort of in the game, but they're a little bit, I don't know, they're tracking, but they're not ahead. And I think they've missed the opportunity to be ahead. But you know what? Now that you mentioned memory, alternative memory, Micron and SOCOM, right? Anybody want to talk about that? I thought that was a pretty big deal. Right. I think
I look at that space. First of all, the memory market still, we're expecting the bit growth for HBM to be in the 96 to 100% growth range this year. So a lot of that is clearly coming from the data center. And the announcement that Micron made with their technology was, again, something that is more application specific and is really meant to drive their own differentiation in that space, because today they're behind SK Hynix, they're behind Samsung, and trying to get their socket wins with some of the AI accelerator companies and also the ASIC companies. So this is a move that Micron is making in order to do that. I think Micron has very good technology at the process level, but they've struggled a little bit in getting their technology solutions qualified, and we're hoping that this approach might help them accelerate into the space, especially to capitalize on the growth that we see for the DRAM portion of the market.
Actually, they on HBM, because of Samsung's limitations or struggles with HBM3E, they vaulted into the number 2 spot from a very, very distant third in less than 12 months, mostly on the heels of their NVIDIA design wins with the Hopper series, and they already supposedly have design wins with the Rubin series with their HBM4, and they've got design wins with HBM3 on the new AMD MI350. So I I actually think Micron's in a pretty good position. I mean, they went from way back, and the fact that they're focused they're focused on the entire data pipeline. They're focused on the memory. They're focused, the main memory. They're focused on the HBM memory. They're focused on the storage. They've got a pretty good high performance solution, that scales, I think, anywhere from enterprise all the way up to, AI applications.
Yeah, I think their passing Samsung was not what the market expected. And whether that's because of good execution on their part or bad execution on Samsung's part is open for debate. But they're definitely in a better position now than they were 18 months ago.
Oh, well, I would give them also, I can't not talk about memory and not bring up SK Hynix, because I think they've executed extremely well. They've been pretty much locked in and on allocation. And one thing that I haven't really talked or posted about this was that in the first quarter of this year, SK Hynix actually surpassed Samsung from a revenue standpoint. This is the first time we've seen that in DRAM. So that's how significant the growth has been for the market. So, and I just wouldn't have thought that could happen, but that just goes to show you that SK Hynix is definitely still outpacing these guys despite the success that Micron has had.
I'd also keep an eye on the Chinese vendors. They are, obviously big players in China, but we may see those emerge outside of China in other regions over the next year or two.
There's agentic AI for you, disturbing you exactly when you don't want to be disturbed. Anyway, where were we? China. I heard China. Karl, you wanted to talk about China?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about China and the reopening of the marketplace to AMD and especially to NVIDIA H20s by the taco movement. I did some research on China, and they actually have about half of the global AI software developers now. That's a significant competitive advantage for China moving forward, and for the U.S. to simply say, "No, we're not going to participate in that market," I think hands the future to China. So I'm not often one to agree with Trump's policies, but in this case, I think Jensen Huang convinced him, probably with help from others like Lisa Su, that you can't just take America's biggest competitive advantage globally across all technology sectors, which is AI and GPUs, and say, no, we're not going to sell that to what could become, one of the largest markets for AI.
Yeah.
Just walking away from that made no sense at all. And allowing selective products to go into that market will help amortize the cost of developing these expensive chips with the additional revenue from China. So I think it was a good move.
Well, I don't want to give AMD and NVIDIA all the credit. I think part of what's happening here is that, we've been seeing for the last 90 days, the U.S. trying to negotiate with the rest of the world, including China, and it hasn't gone anywhere. It's been stalled, right? So you kind of have to start conceding certain things. And one of the immediate ones was this issue here, because you stop AMD and NVIDIA and others from growing, you're stunting the growth, not just of these companies, but the whole entire industry, because AI is the only thing really driving the market today. If you take that out, you got automotive and industrial and consumer, they're all declining at this point. So you don't want to fracture and really stunt the growth of a very important market segment for the world. So I think this is still going to be a volatile space. I think China, as I completely agree with you, Karl, that not only the amount of developers, but how quickly they're moving too. I mean, their large language models and their smaller models are really, really good. And you're seeing them deploy more on clients than you are in the data center, but they're happening. And we cannot forget the fact that China drives a very large amount of data creation, right? You think about everybody that's on every type of platform in China, and there's so much data being created. That's what I think is going to fuel the capabilities that China will continue to have, and you can't underestimate that. So I don't know if it's foresight by the administration. I think they were kind of starting to be put in a corner, and they need to sort of show something in terms of progress, with especially after the April announcements that shocked the markets, and now we're still in a stalled position. But I still worry about the volatility of tariffs really still coming out, whatever the numbers end up being, and that I think will hurt the market, not help it.
Well, and you can't China is important for the sell out or the sell through, but it's also important in terms of the rest of the ecosystem. You got to remember that it's important in terms of establishing standards, global standards, especially as we start looking at 6G, which that effort just kicked off a couple of months ago. It's important in terms of rare earth materials, where they control a large percentage of the vast majority of rare earth materials at this point in time. It's important for engineering resources, for assembly and test capabilities, both at the semiconductor and at the system level. We spent decades creating a global ecosystem for the electronics industry, and trying to pull a piece or a major piece out of that puzzle just makes everything collapse.
Yeah, the interconnectedness of our supply chain. Exactly. Yes. I think that you can't just pull these things apart, and I completely agree.
Yeah. And, I think the other thing is that, even beyond a lot of those, which I think are surface level, surface level things, under the hood, there's the Chinese secret sauce that I don't think the industry really has figured out yet, since the advent of DeepSeek, in particular V3. And so the Chinese language specific optimizations that have happened under the hood, and in all likelihood, what they're going to be doing with Huawei, with their AI supercomputing platforms, and what they will be collaborating with Huawei on in terms of optimizing their software layers in a way that optimizes for the Chinese language. And I think the language itself is highly discounted, simply because a lot of people don't know who aren't Chinese don't know Chinese. And we all have to remember, with these large language models, one of the most fundamental ingredients or foundational element, basic pillars of this is language. And this is one of the reasons why even at GTC, one of the research items that Bill Daley put on his agenda this year was language. And I think there's been a bias that English is somehow the optimal language for AI. That may simply not be the case. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting market, obviously, how things play out, and whether or not this is, where we are today is going to play out in terms of at that market opportunity that the NVIDIA, AMD, and others thought it would be. Time will tell. But I think there's factors that have not yet played out that will play out in the next 6 months, when we'll see what kind of traction that translates into in terms of the AI business for U.S. players in China. So,
and I think this is a good segue to the next topic that you had brought about, which was the meeting from this past Wednesday on the new AI plan for the U.S. and establishing and maintaining that leadership. And I think when I look at that, there's two components to this. One is making sure that we continue to democratize our capabilities, our technology around the world. But the other component to this that we're not talking enough about, but again, it's just a few days ago, but it's really the energy component to this. Is right. Really bringing these two things together, I think, was very important. And I think that the tech guys know this already. And I think that the administration is sort of figuring this out, and they see also an opportunity to kind of push their energy agenda as well. But I think those two things are going to go hand in hand moving forward. And it's a good step. And I'm hoping that the technology companies are going to be the ones that are really pushing this forward, and not necessarily the administration. Because for me, every time I see the public sector involved in any of this, it just slows down innovation, right? It doesn't really help it. There's been, it's been, in the past, you could say that the public sector really helped us get to the moon and bring a lot of innovation in aviation and these different industries and sectors. But today, the AI space and the semiconductor space, it moves very, very fast. And I just don't think that policy is moving fast enough to support it in a way that you can continue to innovate. So I see those are things that have to be tackled.
Yeah, you can't expect people that can't even spell the technology to be able to regulate the technology.
Yeah.
And yes, that is a direct shot.
Yeah, a direct shot, well deserved. No, I agree with you, Mario. I think the best thing the public sector can do is get out of the way.
Exactly.
Right. Allow the technology to develop and flourish and make lots of millionaires in Silicon Valley.
Billionaires here. Yeah.
Billionaires. Yeah.
There are areas where they can actually bring in that will help. Supporting universities, which we're going against that today. Also being able to support R&D efforts, right? These R&D efforts are really an area where semiconductor companies don't cut back in that space, but if they can get some augmentation or some support in that space, that I think has better influence than trying to force people to ship their products from being built in Taiwan to bring them into the US. I mean, we're working with customers now that they're dealing with this pressure from the U.S. administration, and they're being forced to reconsider where they're building existing products, which makes no sense because in some cases it could be 20 or 40% more cost adder to you if you move it from one region to another, and that's just not acceptable. It doesn't keep these companies competitive, and then ultimately it reduces their ability to invest back into our industry.
And they have to really break down the roadblocks. I mean, in terms of building new data centers, getting them up and running, leveraging different types of energy resources, especially allowing SMRs, small nuclear modular reactors. And, we can't afford, especially if we're going to maintain our leadership with the growth in demand and with the continued innovation, we can't maintain our leadership if we can't maintain the capacity we need, the compute capacity we need. We can't afford to wait 2, 3, 4, even sometimes 5 years for a new data center. They need to be able to be up and running within 12 months.
Yeah, I think one concern I see with all of this, though, is that we are starting to kind of destroy some of the regulation that we put in place that actually is good for our environment, is good for our planet. Being able to, drive down chemical absorption in our environments is important. The types of materials that we use to build are important. And we had passed laws about 5 to 6 years ago that were going to help remove some of those harmful, I forgot what you call these materials, but they're materials that just don't go. Yeah, it just don't go away, right? And now we're removing that, and I see that as a big concern. We're sort of chasing profits and scale at the expense of climate, right? And you can see, I mean, you saw what we saw recently in Texas and what's happening in Florida, but really across the country, the world's atmosphere and weather patterns are completely changing and becoming completely unpredictable, right? And a lot of that has to do with some of these chemicals that we've put in our environment over the years that we were trying to remove now, but I think that's going to all go away. These policies that we're implementing, especially in the U.S., are against everything, against our planet, right?
I agree with you. There has to be a balance.
But here's the interesting thing. I think everyone has just latched onto these narratives, the narrative that in order to win in AI, you need to build out massively all these energy hungry data centers, right? This is the assumption.
Yeah. I don't think that's just it. I mean, we need capacity, but at the same time, you got to realize our industry is working to improve efficiency. I mean, just going from the H2 or the Hopper generation to the Blackwell generation, we're looking at an increase in efficiency of 32x. I mean, that's huge. That's huge, and that's unprecedented in our industry. So to be able to have, so I mean, I would argue against that. It's not just about capacity. I mean, it's interesting because Pat Gelsinger 2 years ago at Direct Connect said, listen, we need to kind of densify computing to make it more efficient. We have to put the processors, the accelerators, the memory, the networking all closer together, and that may eventually be in a single module. And that module may be 3 to 5 kilowatts. That was 2 years ago. This year, I'm talking to people, and they're like, Jim, yeah, that's going to be 30 kilowatt, 20 to 30 kilowatts. And we're already speccing out racks that are a megawatt for a single rack.
Right.
But those racks are 1,000 times more efficient than the previous generation.
Right. But for what? Is it for model training? What is it that we're doing?
Yes.
All of this.
It's for model training. It's for some of these new workflows that we're beginning to see be commercialized. But I think ultimately we're still in this middle of this race, right? Where everyone's chasing to get to AGI. And if that happens in the next 3 to 5, But what I'm saying, if it happens in the next 3 to 5 years, at that point in time, then things start changing in terms of how we use capacity differently, how we parse it out differently. I think that right now everybody's just focused on we can't be left behind. So we're going to invest until we get to that point where whether it's OpenAI or maybe it's Meta or someone else gets to that AGI point. Then we start seeing a different kind of a landscape, right?
Right.
But it's not all training. I mean, we've already passed the point where inference processing surpasses training in most data centers or most applications today. And you got to remember that whether you're using an ASIC or whether you're using a GPU, especially the GPU, it's programmable. Those resources can be parsed up into handling multiple different models, handling hundreds, thousands of different users all at the same time. So, I mean, we really are improving efficiency across the board.
Right, at the system level, right? And then the token production level. But the question is, the big open question still is to what economic value, right? That's still a big question out there. So again, I'm just going back to drawing folks' attention to what are some of the assumptions in this that are supporting this narrative that we need to create an energy crisis in order to win AI. And I'm just leaving it out there, right? Obviously, it's great for folks who sell the picks and shovels and build out these data centers. But, going back to a lot of the concerns that Mario brought up, to what end and for what purpose ultimately to create.
Didn't the Google earnings report, I view that as the first nail in the coffin of the concern that AI is simply not going to produce financial returns, because it certainly is producing really attractive financial returns at Google. Is that just an outlier, you think, Leonard, or are we going to see more in next week during the race of tech earnings?
You always have to unpack that. You can't just say because of AI, their business grew XYZ. It's important to do attribution. And that was one of the important things that was very difficult to do when I was in consulting. We always like to build these business cases and case studies about how a certain technology did contribute to XYZ business metric improvements. And that's very difficult to do. You can't just generalize a particular performance in a quarter and entirely attribute it to a certain technology. It's very, very difficult. In fact, today, we don't rightly know how much impact, quote unquote, whatever AI is, on any of these companies, right? It's actually pretty, opaque.
Yeah, but that's like saying, in the early 1980s, what impact is the PC going to have financially? It's had a huge impact. It changed everything. It changed how we think of jobs. It changed how we think about society. It changed how we learn, how we play. It changed everything.
Yeah.
AI is in
Especially the more we went mobile, right? It really changed how we use our devices. I just think I see your point, Leonard. You've always been more of a pessimist, and I appreciate that because we need some folks to be pragmatic, but at the same time,
Pragmatic.
Yeah.
I think
is that the better word for you?
Too much optimism. Yeah. And, too many people looking at the picks and shovels in the goal.
Well, I'll give you some nuggets that support your position. For me, it is a little bit alarming that Google can show such a surge in business, or Microsoft or even Amazon, and yet these companies continue to lay off resources. I mean, just this year so far, we've seen almost 100,000 people in tech just lose their positions. And to me, that's kind of alarming because we're supposed to be in this era where we're growing and we're trying to identify more and more markets on top of what we're investing in, but yet we're getting rid and seeing attrition across a lot of these leader companies that we have in our ecosystem. So, that goes to your point to a certain degree that they're still trying to figure out beyond the internal automation and operational scale that they can get with AI, how do they commercialize that even further to some of their customers where they now can bring it directly to their customer and not just to benefit internal, right? So there's some of that has to balance itself out. But I do agree that some of those things are a little bit alarming, especially when you see a company like Microsoft or Google that has done very well, but yet they're still getting rid of resources that I think are really talented resources that any other industry would love to have.
Yeah. Awesome. See, Jim, we're not all about kumbaya on this show. You know that, right?
Yeah, I know that, but you're wrong and I'm right, so it doesn't really matter.
I'll let you.
Tell you what, we'll come back to this conversation in 5 years and we'll see where we are.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, we will have the business model.
And I think in 5 years, Mario's concern about the layoffs will just magnify. There's been a lot of CEOs in the last 3 or 4 weeks admitting to the fact that AI is going to allow them to significantly reduce their workforce. I don't think we as a society have begun to adequately deal with that reality.
I've been telling my best friend that's a radiologist, he needs to retire because quite honestly, AI and a lot of especially in the US, a lot of the healthcare companies are hiding behind HIPAA laws, which, they can share information. They just can't share the particular personal information. But just sharing all that information and all those resources about all the diagnoses, all the scans, all the images, all the information that's out there at all these US healthcare providers, I guarantee you, we wouldn't need a radiologist tomorrow.
And we probably won't need industry analysts, unfortunately. So luckily, I'm close enough to retirement.
Well, we'll need Leonard. We'll need Leonard. But I mean, this goes back to immigration, right? And the immigration policies that we see today. So all these jobs that we're going to lose in tech, there's going to be a lot of openings for agriculture and service and retail oriented jobs. So hopefully by that point in time, they'll start paying 6 figures for these smart tech
strawberry
guys.
Pickers? I don't see coders becoming strawberry pickers.
Yeah, I don't know. Right? They could be good at it.
I still think you're going to see a lot of tech jobs created. It's just a lot of it's going to come from startups. A lot of it's going to be in different areas. We may not need the people doing hardcore programming, but we still need people that are looking at the data and programming the AI models and modifying and making the AI models more efficient. We still need a lot of talent. It's changing. Same way the PC changed a lot of industries. It shifted from manual tasks to automated tasks. But we still grew a lot of these industries.
Yeah. Jensen has said it well. Jensen said that, if you're not doing AI, that's when you risk losing your job. It's not AI itself, right? And I agree. I think that there's automation that definitely will displace, but it will also create new ways of us doing work that we haven't thought about yet. I want to be hopeful about that because if we're not, right now, it's more of a cost decision. You're seeing Microsoft make moves to cut heads, but they're applying for more H-1B visas and stuff. So things like that have to be addressed.
The interesting thing is, so here goes back to the earlier topic about attribution. A lot of that in many people's mind is that they're attributing it to AI as being the reason for the headcount reduction. But you just mentioned something really important. Now you're bringing in cheaper labor to replace maybe older labor or maybe even outsourcing. And so this is where I'm saying we have to be very, very careful. And whereas analysts, we need to have diligence and not just face value, take a press release headline and think that's basically what's happening. And that was my only point, guys. And why, and keep in mind, I'm pretty deep into end market stuff, all the way up the software stack. I'm not seeing the kind of revolutionary adoption you guys are talking about. In fact, like even at DTW, they're very cautious, guys. And so this assumption that you're going to see generative AI orchestrating and managing a telco network autonomously, we're very far away from that.
Yeah.
And so again, the question is, what kind of demand, what kind of end market demand other than cat videos and pornography are going to fuel this thing is still the big question. And that is the reason why I take more of this alternative stance when we get together. And you know what? This is beautiful. I think this is the most important part of our program here and what we're trying to do. Just bring our different perspectives to the table, and then hopefully our audience walks away with something a hell of a lot smarter than what any one of us might be opining about. So, but any final thing, because this is running pretty long. It's really good, Mario. It's awesome having you on, man, because I think you make.
Thank you. I'm glad you invited me finally.
Oh, come on, man. It was always an open door for you, man.
I know Jim is your favorite, but
TSMC. No. Yeah, I'll replace him with you any day.
Wow, look at that.
I keep saying we need a slap button so I can slap Leonard when I do.
Yeah, right now, Jim, can you slap him for me, please?
Yeah.
All right. So TSMC.
Come on, we got to talk about TSMC.
Not surprised by their earnings announcement. They continue to drive faster growth than the industry as a whole. So I said this in a couple interviews I've done, but the whole foundry industry is growing 17 to 18%. TSMC will grow about 30%. And they already control about 67, 68% of the market, right?
Yeah.
So very dominant position. I think they're a couple of generations ahead of the competition in terms of, Samsung has talked about 2 nanometer, even Intel's doing 18A, but the reality is that these nodes don't matter until customers are on board, right? And until customers are shipping product commercially, and they're just doing it right. Over 53% of their business is coming from what they classify as HPC, which is CPU and AI compute and so forth. So I see tremendous growth for them. I don't see anybody else touching what they're doing at this point. And there's such a big, important weight into this industry, including what's happening in the US, right? I think that the administration's tried to put pressure on TSMC, but I think they hold more cards that they haven't used yet. And it's good to see they're investing around the world.
I love how Jim is proactively trying to ruin this show.
My camera fell off. Sorry about that.
We'll edit that out. Leonard.
Won't. He's going to have to live with that.
I am. I went from being gone to upside down to right side up. It's a Friday.
Yeah, no. Karl, any thoughts? Let's go around the table.
On TSMC?
Yeah.
No, I think Mario nailed it. I think the what they've not just done this quarter, but what they've done over the last 5 years has been truly phenomenal. And if anybody deserves to lead the industry right now, it's TSMC. I think the only issue will be, potential for geopolitical conflict that would damage their ability to continue to deliver. Other than that, they got blue sky ahead. Green lights, blue sky, and Pink Floyd. They're just nailing it.
I think over the next 3 to 4 years, there's going to be two companies that are $200 billion semiconductor companies. They'll be one of them. And we don't know the other ones. I mean,
Yeah.
you can see that. I don't see anything slowing that down unless we go into a world war or something like that. That's the only way.
Well, it's Jim and I talked about this. Not that it's going to lead to world war, but the rapid militarization of the technology, right? And it's happening. You see defense talking about AI much more than before, and it's an interesting topic. But
you'll have to tackle that next time.
Yeah. No, but the defense industry, it's an industry, right?
Yeah, it is
about, and it's a reality that is where AI is going to be applied. And the question is how, and undoubtedly as the defense industry pursues the workable application of AI, which actually, interestingly, in the AI action plan, they mentioned this. AI is really not at the state where you're going to throw it out into the middle of a battlefield or in frontline operations because it's just not reliable enough, right?
But we are seeing that.
I disagree. I mean, drones are now the primary vehicle for military operations.
Yeah, I was going to say that too.
They've all got AI chips on them.
If you can think about it, I can guarantee you the Defense Department's been working on it for over a decade. And I'm not kidding when I say that. I used to work for General Dynamics, and some of the technology we worked on still hasn't seen the light of day, but it was far in advance to anything that you could imagine.
I agree.
Not to mention even facial recognition and call and voice identification, stuff like that. That's actually been in use for more than 20 years.
Jim can't wait until we have the episode dedicated to
we're going to probably have to sign something to waive our rights away if we start talking about military. But I agree with Karl. The drone wars that we've seen have actually brought a lot more visibility to the potential of applications being used in military. I think we can't forget the worldwide surveillance that we're seeing now, using social media platforms as a way to gather more and more information on citizens. And you look at what ICE is doing today in the US. They have access to databases that companies have been building for years, and that's how they're able to identify and locate folks. And I'm not talking about the random things that they're doing, but some of those things are all using technology that we've had for a long time. And you start putting AI on top of some of this technology, it just gets a lot more not pervasive, but it's just intrusive. And we'll see where that goes. I hope that we don't get to that point, but I'm afraid by the leadership that we see around the world these days that that's the way things are going.
Well, there's conflict, so it's naturally going to create demand for those applications. I mean, that's the thing.
I think it's not just conflict. I also think that convenience always convinces consumers and citizens to give up their privacy. And we've seen that with our emails. We see that with our phones and with even social media today that, we use all of that. Right. But anyway, that's a different topic. I'll stick to semiconductors.
Hey, Mario, living out in the middle of the woods in the mountains in eastern Arizona doesn't look so bad anymore, does it?
No, it doesn't. I might throw some dollars over there. Just build me a little shack up there.
But really quickly, going back to TSMC, one of the things I think has been really interesting over the last, I think it's like a couple of quarters, is that HPC is now a larger portion of revenue than mobile. And going back,
it has been since probably 2023 or late 2022 that transition happened against mobile.
Once, and then it went back up, and then and now I think
it's just been sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, now it's like 60%. That's like, right. Versus now, I think it's like 37% or much smaller number. And it goes back to Karl's point that, and why I think it's important for, I think we'll all agree, it's important for Intel to figure out if they're going to be relevant, figure out what their HPC game is going to be, whether it's for the PC, but, obviously the outsized growth of HPC due to AI infrastructure, compute, and probably advanced packaging and all the other stuff is probably even more critical now for Intel, despite where Intel is today, right? And so, and again, the fact that they don't have a well gelled strategy at this point in the game. And Jim, you always say it in the semiconductor industry, whatever comes to market, you planned, 2-3 years before. That is my biggest concern.
I mean, you hear it from folks like Lisa Su. She'll talk about when we make bets on Zen, it was for the next 5 to 10 years. And I think the bets that Intel's making now, or that they have to make, is for the next 5 to 10 years. But for me, I'm looking closely at the sovereign AI investments, the announcements like Stargate or Celestial that you're seeing in Japan. There's so many different types of public sector programs. And for me, what's notably interesting is that there are certain big names that are not in those announcements, right? You're not seeing some of the hyperscalers in that announcement, with the exception to Microsoft, and you're not seeing Intel. And that's interesting. So they have to get back to that point where they not only take advantage of their position on the enterprise, but even some of these public sector areas, which I think will drive more AI infrastructure, they need to be in those accounts.
Yeah.
In those
That's
opportunities.
probably where the big customer is that they're looking for 14A, right?
Yeah.
That has to kind of start now, right?
Yeah.
So
yes.
Last word to Jim, because Mario, I think, sucked most of the oxygen out of the room.
Wow. I guess he wants me the first and last time to be on.
No, dude. I love you, man.
Giant sucking sound. Okay, we'll attribute that to Mario from now on.
You get the last word.
Hey, Jim, that sounded bad in so many ways. I don't even know why you say it. Drop your camera again.
Yeah. Drop your camera again.
Drop my microphone this time, right? Last word on what? Actually, it's kind of interesting.
Say that you're all wrong.
No, actually, I would say that, some of the things we see going on right now in the industry, some of the most interesting things are around partnerships and acquisitions. We saw Global Foundries acquire MIPS over the past month. We saw Synopsys complete their acquisition of Ansys. I think a lot of what we're going to see over the next couple of years, and this is, I think, a topic for a future podcast, is how the dynamics of our industry change. Because I think the traditional value chain, not just because of AI, but because of innovation, is getting turned upside down.
Yeah. Karl, you and I talked about that at Cadence Live.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see, Jim. I agree with you, and I think it'd be interesting to see what Apple does, right? Because so far, Apple has been victim of their own anybody but NVIDIA. What I call their ABN strategy.
Yes.
How you gonna do AI? I don't know, but we're going to use everybody but NVIDIA.
We should.
They're paying the price for that now. And they've been nowhere. I mean, Siri still doesn't use AI. It's just like, really? Are you kidding me? You either hired the wrong people or you gave them the wrong tools, or both.
Or you didn't give them $200 million. So, these are all great topics for us to talk about in future episodes. But that's all the time we have. We got to cut it off here because this is the longest episode ever. But Mario, great to have you on, man. Fantastic. Jim, wonderful as always. Karl, love you to death. And so thanks everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you found the episode enlightening and insightful. And please contact these gentlemen in their respective firms. They have their own businesses. They're not part of Next Curve. So everything that they say is entirely their own thinking and opining. But you can reach Karl at on LinkedIn, as well as Jim, as well as Mario. So connect with them there. But you can reach Karl at www.cambrian-ai.com and Jim at TiriusResearch.com and Mario at IDC. And so remember to like, share, comment, share your perspective and reactions to this episode, and subscribe to the reThink podcast here on YouTube and Buzzsprout, and take us on the road, your jog, and listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. And, remember to also subscribe to Next Curve Research Portal at www.next-curve.com for the tech and industry insights that matter. We will see you again next month, and hopefully we'll have all four of us on again, because this is really great. This is great. Really fun hanging out with you guys and just arguing.
All right. Time to drop the mic, Jim. All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Enjoy the week.
Cheers.
Enjoy the weekend. Bye.